What's up, guys? Welcome back to Point Kentucky. My name is Hunter Mitchell, joined once again by my co-host Leah Edmond. How you doing, Leah?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. We are live from Rupp Arena, joined by assistant coach Meredith Jewell. How are you, Meredith?
Good. How are you?
Something you all might not know, actually, is that we haven't gotten to talk to Meredith, obviously, because in postgame we're talking to Craig, but Meredith is a big reason why this podcast exists. She is one of the people that approached myself and Leah about doing it, so you all have Meredith to thank for this even being something. So thank you, Meredith. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about, obviously, big news. Y'all finished the regular season 19-7, win your 7th straight SEC championship. We'll start there. What did it mean to you guys to win that SEC championship after the start of the season, 2-6?
Sure. I think what makes it so special is seeing this team start to believe in themselves and seeing us change some of our offense and some of our defensive game plan and how we're training things. And that just takes time. And I think that the outside world might not have been able to see that. But if you're around our team every day, it was cool to see them be like, wow, this is not going in the right direction. What can we do to turn it around? And they really just dived into the training and started having trust and believe in themselves. And that's what makes the championship this year, I think, so special, is because of how it did start. And I think that there are people outside probably that didn't think that we could do it, and we're really questioning some of the things we were doing. And I think it's cool to see that ship go in the right direction. And our team win 7 in a row is hard, and I think the longer we go on a streak, the tougher it is. It makes it harder to continue a streak. It's easy to start one and do something different, but it's hard to maintain that success.
Now that the regular season's done and you've seen what happened after that non-conference, how did that non-conference, playing that hard of a schedule, only being 2-6 going into SEC, how did that change the rest of the season? How did that prepare you for SEC?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot about ourselves. We saw a lot of holes and things blocking defense or offensive systems and how things were not working. And I think that if we don't lose those matches, we don't learn those things about ourselves. And then being able to play, at Nebraska and at Purdue in these really insane environments, I think helped our freshmen, Molly Tuzzo and Brooklyn DeLay, learn how to play in those tough environments and understand when the crowd is loud and you can't hear each other, how can we communicate and make the game go.
We talked on the podcast early in the season, me and Leah, this team has the horses. It's just a matter of when they put it together. And we thought y'all were going to be good in the SEC. I don't think either of us saw 17-1. That was a bit of a surprise, especially in a league that obviously got 8 teams in the tournament this year. How did you all keep the morale high? How did you keep the confidence high? Because again, starting the season 2-6, playing the Purdues, the Nebraskas, you were playing some of them close, and you all were getting better. You weren't seeing the result at the end of the match. It was still going to be a loss, regardless of if it was a sweep or a 5-setter. How did you keep the team morale that high to go into that conference season and do what you did?
Yeah, I think that it was a lot about having a lot of separate conversations, one-on-one conversations, group conversations. Hey, we're this close. We got to get this one little thing better. And then as a collective group, it kind of just all came as one big thing. Again, what's been really nice is, we play Purdue really close, barely lose. We go to Nebraska, have a tough first 2 sets, and then the third set we pull it off. And so I think having even that 1 set win was almost as an encouragement, I think, for our team, knowing that, oh wow, we can compete with the number 1 team in the country. We should be able to compete with anybody. And that might have gone as a loss in the record book, but I think for us it was a tiny win for our boost of confidence.
So the offense is the story of the season, but I want to talk about defense. I know you worked with the pros. How much of a difference does it make knowing that at one point through rotations you have basically 3 liberos back row? How does that change the game for you all?
It's incredible. They do an awesome job from a serve receive standpoint. In our rotation 4, we have them 3 passing, and so it's been cool to see them kind of gel. Kind of the biggest change for them this year, I think, was unconventional ways of hitting the ball. And so we worked a lot on just get hit by it. Can we get hit by it? Can it go up? Can we throw an arm and make one-arm plays?
Molly
Tuzzo, yes.
She's famous for it.
Famous for it, yes. So we've really worked on the unconventional things because they are so athletic, because they have such good technical skill and technical base. How can we teach them unconventional things that they probably have never trained? And so that's been really fun to kind of train them in that. And I think they like learning new things too, and not doing everything so conventional. So we laugh a lot and have a good time. But it's a game changer when you have three DSs like that who can run the back row, have confidence in each other, switch to Bevan to middle back, and I think that's allowed her to read the game as well as she does and play in middle back instead of kind of pigeonholing her in left back and only digging those sharp balls from the left. So I think that's been a really good change for us, is putting her there, allowing her to dig more balls and use her skill sets.
Let's transition now to that offense. The story of the 2020 title team was how balanced that team was. You didn't know where the ball was going to be set, and you didn't know who was going to get the kill. you all this year, you don't want to compare teams, but that's been the story of your season. Again, it's coming from the left pin, the right pin, the middle. Early in the year, you all couldn't put the ball down. Now you all cannot not put the ball down. It seems like your first ball kill is always so efficient, but even Craig was talking about how your transition digs or your transition kills are wildly underrated. You all are getting so many digs in transition and then quickly putting them down. How have you seen this offense go from, I mean, as bad as it was early to one of the most dynamic offenses in the entire country?
We first talked about a lot of the dig precision piece. Can we dig the ball as high as we can in the air in the middle of the court to try to let just Jerome run the offense from there? And so we worked a lot on that piece. And then initially we started running the go faster. So now it's a shoot. And when I say faster, it's like 0.02 seconds faster. Okay, it's not that big of a deal. And then running a faster tempo there. Our four ball has changed to being farther inside for the outside. Our middle routes now have 3 different things that are a B, so that 3-zone gap. There's one where it's a curl, and so they jump at the setter. There's one where there's a pull, they jump up. So it's just causing a lot of chaos, I think, for middles on the other team to have to figure out which direction are they jumping and then what shots are available from that spot. But all of that took a lot of time to form that connection and try to understand, okay, what does the set have to look like in order for Z and Elise to be able to hit those balls? And then just using Z's athleticism to be able to do that. She's great in front of the setter, Mel's great behind the setter, and so putting them in the positions that they are, I think, has been really helpful. And then we're starting to develop a little bit of a 6 with Rebo, so she kind of has an inside route as well. But just the offense and trying to understand, we wanted to run it a little bit faster, so getting Jerome used to that, Lane used to that, so that our hitters can then understand what the set looks like, where it's coming from, and where it should be. I think that overall took time to develop, and now you're seeing it fire on all cylinders.
So looking at the tournament, I think there's something really cool with this is that you have 2 people on your staff that played for Kentucky in the tournament in the past 7 years. So it's really recent. Y'all know what the tournament situation is like now compared to maybe some other coaching staffs have people that played in the tournament 10, 20 years ago. How does that make a difference with preparing a team knowing you have 2 people who have done it with Craig as a player and now as a coach?
I'm not sure there's any other staff in the country that has the situation we have, so I think that's super special. We were talking about that a little bit at Arkansas. It is cool to be able to relate to them and understand what they're going through and be like, hey, this is a big stage, we get it. And I think, again, it goes back to those preseason games help our freshmen be able to prepare themselves for that. But we can go through with them and walk through it and kind of talk them off the ledge if we need to. I think our team plays best when they're having fun. And I think sometimes we get a little too serious, and so I'll have to crack a joke or something. And you know, Craig can get frustrated, Ben can get frustrated, but it's really easy to connect with them and understand what the pressure is when you're on the court and playing in these high pressure situations. So
we know you're a coach, so you're not going to go off about the SEC Player of the Year award to me, and Leah will do that once you step out. So let's just talk about Emma and how good she's been this year. She has somehow, as good as she was for freshman and sophomore campaigns, somehow she's gotten better this year. Obviously, the quarterback of that offense. What have you seen out of her this year where she's been able to take her play somehow to another level?
It's absolutely insane how much better she continues to get. I think what's been really cool is Ben and Madison kind of have these one-on-one conversations with her during timeouts. I'm sure you guys see it. But Ben's kind of like the dad, and then Madison's kind of like the sister. And so Madison's a sister that can kind of communicate with her, and then Ben will only come in if he needs to, like, really be a hard dad on her. And so that relationship has been super cool, and I think developing more of a feel for the game. Who should I set? Why should I set them? What's on the other side? And so Ben and Madison do a great job of making this offensive game plan. And we kind of have like green light blockers, we have yellow light blockers, and red light blockers. So like they're red, we want to avoid them. They're awesome blockers. And so they do a really good job of kind of diving into that offensive game plan that I think allows her to be like, okay, you remember on the scouting report, red light. We don't want to set that way right now. And so I think that has helped her thrive. And then her connections with her teammates, I think, have just gotten better. And her maturity continues to grow and how she communicates with others and takes responsibility when things don't go the way we want it to. And that's been the biggest improvements I've seen.
Someone else I want to talk about is Erin Lamb. So she's in the same class as Emma Grown, but I want to talk about her growth in this season alone. So seeing her from the maybe first half of the season, August and September, she struggled a little bit, especially against teams with big blocks, and all of a sudden you throw her in the Arkansas and she turns into a completely different hitter. I mean, I've seen her confidence is now showing on the court that I got to see in practice when I came to practice a little bit. So talk about a little bit of her transition during that kind of SEC moment where she wasn't playing that much and how that's helped the team now go in the tournament.
I think she grew that confidence in practice, and I think what's so special about Erin Lamb is she's always ready. She's always staying after. She's always knows the scouting report. She's asking good questions. She wants to get better. And so kind of leading up to that a couple weeks prior, we're like, Erin Lamb is going off in practice. It was cool to see her get first-hand kills, to have different shot selection, to be able to go super sharp, to be able to go down the line. And some of the power tip stuff that she's developed has been super, super cool. I don't think you guys saw it. You saw it a little bit in practice when you came, but it was cool to see that develop, and so we knew when that opportunity presented itself, she was going to absolutely crush it. And no one is more deserving of that than she is because of how patient she's been, and she's been an awesome teammate while she waited for her opportunity, and now she's absolutely crushing it. It's been really, really cool to see as a coach.
She's turning into Allie Stonewall with that sharp angle
Yes.
we keep talking about. That was Allie's favorite shot, and it seems to be one of hers, even out of system. She just said, I'll just try it.
Yeah, why not?
Let's transition now to that tournament. You all have a region where you have a lot of opponents that you all have played this year. Obviously, Nebraska's up there, 3 SEC teams. Obviously, Arkansas is one of those that you look down the line and you could possibly have to play them to get to the regional final. Is that something that you like seeing, to have to play teams that you're familiar with, or is it like, oh, we have to beat them or try to beat them again? What is that like as a coach and as a player?
I think it's a mix of both. I think it's advantageous for us because when we look on the other side of the net, we've seen these teams 2 times this year. And so it's a level of comfortability, I think, for our team. Maybe it will help the nerves not be so high in such a high pressure situation, especially if we can make it that far. So for me, I think I like it, and I think it's easy to sell to our team, be like, hey, we played this team 2 times before. Like, this is going to be such a fun match again, and we can go into it with confidence, having a couple wins under our belt against those teams.
So we're introducing so many new fans to volleyball, and I know they're definitely more used to the basketball tournament. Explain how much of an advantage it can be to be able to host the first 2 rounds here in Lexington.
Yeah, it's super advantageous because our team gets to sleep in their own bed. They get to be around their people here. We can pack up and have fans here and make it a home court advantage. It's super nice to be able to host the first 2 rounds for those reasons, and then to be able to go to Nebraska instead of going out to California or somewhere crazy. I think will also be very advantageous for us as we played at Nebraska this year. So.
Obviously, 8 teams from the SEC get into the league. How do you think the league prepared you all for this tournament? There's been so much parity across the entire country, not even just in the league. Obviously, see 8 teams from the SEC in that tournament. It's a big deal. Usually it's the Big Ten getting all those,
Yes.
and this year it's the SEC.
Yeah, I think even last year we had 7 SEC teams in there. So it's a great time for SEC volleyball, and I think that our league has great outsides, our league has great pros, our league has great middles, and so each team presents something different, and I think that that's helped us learn and challenge ourselves to be prepared for the tournament. And whether they have 5 good hitters on their roster, whether they have 2, I think that the SEC has definitely prepared us for offenses that we're going to see similar in the tournament.
Going into the tournament, what's the mentality? So I know that kind of in volleyball we like to break it up as a non-conference, regular season, conference season, and then tournament time. What's the mentality? What do you do with the team? Is it any different than you do during the season, or is it something completely new?
Yeah, I think Craig does a good job of saying it's a 21-day season, so each day we have to make a win somehow. So can we get 1% better? Can we tweak a couple things? We're not going to change the whole world in 21 days, but what can we make a little bit better that will set us apart in the next match that we have? And so we're going to take it a day at a time, I think, and that's kind of the best way to do it because you don't want to overlook anyone, and you want them to feel confident and good going into these matches. And so keeping it consistent with what we've been doing and making those tiny changes, I think will help our team be successful.
All right, Meredith. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you guys on Thursday when you take on Wofford.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Meredith. All right, Leah, let's break down this bracket. Before we get there, we've got some SEC Player of the Year awards to talk about.
We do.
Let's start. You want to start with the positive or the negative?
Let's start with the positive.
Let's start with the
because there were
positive.
some good things that did happen.
So Kentucky's newest freshman, Brooklyn DeLay, named Freshman of the Year, joining the likes of you and Madison Lilly, Allie Stumler. A phenomenal freshman campaign. What did you see out of her this year that enabled her to get that award?
I mean, she just came in with so much confidence, and I think that's the big thing is when you have a non-conference season, when you go 2-6, and there were games that she definitely struggled in, that she wasn't getting kills, and it wasn't a normal rhythm. To see her go into SEC and still play with just kind of like that same freeness that freshmen clearly have because they feel like it's a new thing. I get to be a part of a new thing, and to see her step into a new role during SEC, because remember during non-conference she was only playing 3 rotations. She was only playing front row and somebody was coming in for her, and then she got thrown into playing 6 rotations. So to be able to get all that more responsibility as a freshman and then perform the way that she does, that award kind of awards her for being able to handle that really well. And I mean, I just saw so much like things that when you're looking into the future of her next 3 years, you're like, I know how important the spring is to volleyball players, and knowing what the potential is for her already, and getting the one spring where she gets to really sit there and train and get stronger and things like that, I can only imagine what she's going to be like next year and the next years after that.
Yeah, we've talked about the fact that Kentucky gets her for 3 more years and she's already as talented as she is. She's become as lethal at that back row attack as you were, as Allie was, as Maddie Skinner was when she was here. Like that's something that's been missing for a couple years. Kentucky hasn't had that a part of its offense, and now that it's back, I think you're seeing again the fruit of that labor of having that as an option. That was very much something that Kentucky used during that title run. They went to Allie out of the back row, they even went to Avery out of the back row some. So having that as an option is always, it helps you when you get stuck in those 2-hitter rotations. Again, early in the year when she wasn't playing 6 rotations, Kentucky was getting stuck in those 2-hitter rotations a lot. And so they were struggling to side out and not let teams get on a roll. Now that you have that option out of the back row, we're not seeing Kentucky get stuck as much. If a team goes on a run of 2 or 3 points, it usually ends 2 or 3. And that's how, Craig says all the time, can we get 2 or 3 3-0 runs in a set? And if we can, we like our chances to win it. Kentucky is doing that and preventing other teams from doing it. And I think that's what's really encouraging, especially as you go into a postseason play where you're playing teams that you're not as familiar with, although Kentucky is different this year, considering it's the SEC region apparently for Kentucky. So for her to win that Freshman of the Year award, again, what she, but also Molly Tuzza, who's on the all-freshman team, we'll mention her and what she was able to accomplish, that's going to help Kentucky wildly this year. But just seeing their future and them being 2 pieces that are going to be here for the next 3 years is really exciting to see. Craig Skinner wins Coach of the Year. I think you and I both assumed that was going to happen. Taking a team from 2-6 in the non-conference, 3-7 once the first 2 SEC games of play started. I've seen people say, well, that 2-6 is out of context, right? It's not telling the full story. 2-6 is 2-6. Like, yes, their schedule was hard, but when you look at where they were, there was a lot of wondering at how is the team's morale? Are they going to be able to just get out of the rut? Yes, the games were against hard teams, and you were losing to good teams. It wasn't like you were out of the top 25 or losing to bad teams, but 2-6 is still 2-6, and it's still on you and the team to turn that around. And Craig was able to do that. We saw this year his creativity moving Eleanor Bevan to middle back. Where you don't usually see liberos be playing. The fact that when Reagan went hurt, he switched Brooklyn to that 6 rotation, but then even when Reagan came back, saw Brooklyn is doing too well for us to take it back. He was willing to do something new and stick with it. We saw his creativity and his motivation on full display this year, and that's a big reason why he won Coach of the Year. I think you and I are both a little surprised to see 4 SEC Coaches of the Year this year. I think to name a third of the league essentially as Coach of the Year is something that it's strange. You don't want to look. Arkansas had a phenomenal year, one of their best years in 20 years. Tennessee obviously finished the season ranked 8th before losing to South Carolina this weekend. They had a great year. Missouri, to go from winning 9 games last year to being solidly in the tournament this year. Each team had reasons why they should be named that, but you also look. I'm okay with co-coaches. I've seen that several times. I don't have a problem with that. But to name 4 is a lot, and I think that's where you begin to lose some of the validity of your award if a third of the league can win Coach of the Year. It kind of takes away the specialness and the uniqueness of winning the award, because it's like, well, Craig did all that work and was great, but 3 other people won it. And it's an award that's voted for by coaches, which that in and of itself you wonder about, because do coaches have certain, we're stuck in Kentucky, or they beat us, so is there bias there? You don't know. But what were your thoughts on that, on seeing 4 coaches win that award?
I think it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a difference between having usually co means 2, and so like if having it being Kentucky and Missouri or something of that nature where it's 2 coaches, I completely understand that, get that completely. 2 makes sense, but having 4 coaches, so you're telling me that 4 coaches made that big of an impact that you need to have 4 of them get that award at the same time? Because looking at how social media reacted to it, it's kind of like it turned into, well, then who did the best job then coaching wise? Because then now you're saying that 4 people. That doesn't happen in any other sport. It doesn't happen in football, basketball, baseball, softball, soccer, any other sport. You're not seeing multiple people win the same award. So it didn't sit right. They all deserve it, absolutely, but that's one of those things where you're like, okay, 4 people got it. It's split vote. Okay, here are your 4 options. Y'all got to pick again.
Right.
And something of that nature, because at that point, it just kind of becomes more of a, well, everybody did really good, so everybody's
Yeah.
going to get the award. And if that's the case, then you're not giving the best of the best the awards, and you kind of lose the respect of the award because now everybody has the potential to get it if you have a semi-decent season.
Well, and I think when you look at the last week of the regular season, Kentucky beating Arkansas in a sweep that really wasn't close
Yeah.
to prevent them from even getting a share of the title, Tennessee being swept by a not great South Carolina team,
Yeah.
it does kind of make you look at it and go, well, coaches of the year, how do you have that result the final week of the regular season
It's a
and then
full season thing. It's not
Yes.
like, hey,
Right.
the beginning of the season, you guys were all top 10.
Right.
Hey, you had some pretty good wins and you do some good things, but then the last week of the season, everything fell apart. That's when you have to stay on
Right.
lock. It's when the last of the
Right.
season. So to give people awards after Kentucky beat, 2 or 3 of those teams in the last 2 weeks. And so then I'm just kind of like, where do you
Right.
where do you do that? So it's going to be really interesting, especially because we're adding 2 teams next year to the SEC. Does that change that, or does that add on to it? Because now you have a Texas team that is used to sweeping awards in the Big 12 like it's nothing. So how do you protect the validity of the awards and what they mean to people?
Let's transition to the one that I think had both of us fired up. Emma Grome not named your SEC Player of the Year. Former Wildcat Sophie Fisher named that position for Georgia, but Georgia was a team that was very much on the bubble. They did get in this year, but they finished 6th in the conference. 10-8 was their SEC record. I think both of us, at least on my part, I didn't even see a scenario where Emma Grome was not named the SEC Player of the Year. When I saw that, I was shocked. I thought maybe Brooklyn, as great as she was, might not get Freshman of the Year. I thought Kennedy Martin of Florida might get it, just because Kennedy was a focal point of the offense all season, and Brooklyn really kind of became a big part of that offense towards the SEC season, wasn't as involved in that non-conference. So I wouldn't have been surprised if Brooklyn didn't win it. But to see Emma not get SEC Player of the Year was, I think, a stunner for me. It sounds like a lot of people around the program, obviously a lot of former players, just a little surprised by that. Your initial thoughts on that, on not getting that award?
It's, for me, it's going to be what's the argument? So what is the argument? Because, I mean, Zoe Fisher's a middle, and I will respect her game. She had multiple 20-point games as a middle is ridiculous.
Absurd.
You don't see that from any middle. That's outside type of numbers. So for her to do something like that is truly incredible. But in a body of work, when you have a setter who is on the court all the time affecting the game, not only as a setter, but playing defense and serving and blocking. So those are 4 things that she does compared to a middle that just hits and blocks, and then she hit out of the back row when she was serving if she got the opportunity. So for me, it's figuring out of kind of like the impact on the court. Who is making the biggest impact on the court? Who is changing the game? When you have a setter that leads the NCAA in assists, the NCAA, not
Entire
the
country.
SEC, that is the entire country. That is every Division I school in the country, from the Power Fives all the way to the little schools in the middle of Texas and nowhere. Every single one of those schools, and mid-majors have a tendency to be the ones that lead those
Right.
because of the parity between mid-majors and Power 5 schools in the competition. But for her, at Kentucky, a big-time school, a top 10 school, playing the record and the schedule that they played this year, for you to say to me that that means nothing. To win 16 games in a row, to have an offense that's firing in a way that it hasn't since 2020 when they won national championship, 3 SEC championships in a row for her. I don't know where the argument is compared to a player who was on a team that did make the tournament, which is fantastic for the conference and fantastic for Georgia's program, but finishing 6th or 7th in the conference, that's not an argument for me. It's interesting from my side, from someone who's won the award, from someone who thinks that she got duped from the award, in the same type of perspective of getting lost to a middle. It's a very interesting concept of, at that point, what is the criteria for this? Is it the impact that you're making on the team? Is it the school that you go to that has an impact on that? Like, now it comes into question of, is it turning into Kentucky fatigue of Kentucky would now have that award for 6 years in a row?
Yeah.
It started me in 2018, and no one else has gotten it since then. So is it then Kentucky fatigue of, I'm tired of seeing Kentucky win the awards? And that turns into a thing of now the best player needs to get that award, regardless of what school they play for. Someone that affected the game in a way that made it difficult for you to win, you can't compete with that. And so it's just very hard to see that. I think in that situation, you got to go co. And that's what I'm saying. I think this year could have been a lot of co's, which is fine. You could have had a co-libero of the year, co-freshman of the year, co-coaches of the year, because then it shows you the validity of this conference now.
Just not 4.
Yeah, maybe
The
not
issue.
4, but 2 would be fine. But having understanding that you have 8 teams in the tournament, more than Big Ten teams, which is unheard of, and you have teams you had 3 teams almost in the top 12 at one point in the season. Like, that's understandable.
Right.
People can understand that. But when you give one person an award or you give 4 people an award in the same year, then it's just kind of like, well, what is your criteria now then that you gave 4 people this award, but only 1 person this award? Because you had 2 co-scholar athletes of the year as well. So there's chances of multiple people winning these awards, and they're not doing that, and it just makes me question things of now, well, do we need to move to a Big Ten model of having a setter of the year? So then we take away player of the year and setter of the year and make that completely separate, so then people are getting the recognition they deserve.
Right. And I think both of us agree. Sophie Fisher is one of the most talented athletes in the entire league. No one's questioning that. She's one of the best middles in the country. What she brings to Georgia, her athleticism, how much she is set as a middle is not common in the collegiate game. They go to her so often, she almost plays like a right side. Obviously, she's an option out of the back row. She's serving for them. So no one's saying that Sophie Fisher isn't deserving of that award even. It's more so Emma Grome should have not been off of that. And I think, when you begin to bring in, was there Kentucky fatigue? I think that's absolutely what happened there. Kentucky, like you said, has been winning that award so often, but if you don't give the player or the award of the best player, at some point the validity of your award loses its validity. And at some point, winning has to matter. And to win this league by 2 whole games over 2 other teams even that were in the top 10, the SEC has 3 teams in the top 10 right now, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Kentucky won that league outright by 2 games. To not give that award to your setter, who, again, we've talked about it, the offense was in the pits at the beginning of the year. They couldn't score, and they were changing some things, speeding some things up, switching up the placement on the ball. For Emma to take all of that in and not only make the offense good, but make it great, make it one of the best in the country. And we've talked about it, the fact that Kentucky's stats were so poor in the non-conference, but now when you look at Kentucky's stats nationally, they're up there in the top 5, top 10 of the entire country. That's taking that bad start into account. That's how good they've been recently. That's something where I don't know how you don't give that to Emma.
Yeah.
And look, Emma's one of those players too where she'll say, I don't care. Like, Emma doesn't care about that. Emma just likes playing volleyball and likes having fun. But it's more so, when you look at Kentucky and what this team has accomplished, you want your athletes to be recognized for what they deserve. And I think Emma very clearly deserved that award, and especially considering, you went 17-1 in the league, only 1 team beat you, and it was when your roster wasn't fully healthy. Yeah. When the coaches are voting on the player, none of you coaches beat her. So how do you not give her the award? 8,
especially because she won it last year.
Yeah, Georgia lost 8 times this year. So as great as Sophie Fisher was, teams found a way to stop her, found a way to beat that team. No one outside of Tennessee found a way to beat Kentucky in the SEC. And even when Tennessee did it, it was without Reagan Rutherford. Yeah. So it's hard for me to justify how do the coaches not give it to the one who is running the most, if not, or one of the most dynamic offenses in the country. Let's transition now to the NCAA tournament. Kentucky gets Wofford on Thursday. They'll play at 7:30. This is an interesting region, a very familiar region for Kentucky. You've got Arkansas, Florida, obviously Kentucky, Nebraska's up there at the very top. What are your initial thoughts on the bracket, and what did you kind of see, what did you think first whenever you saw where Kentucky got the draw?
I think it's interesting because, like, we talked to Meredith, and she was like, it does help you because you're familiar with these teams, but I think as people that cover the SEC, it's frustrating. It's kind of like, well, we put 8 teams in the tournament, but we're going to put 4 of you in the same region, which technically means that, majority of the teams will be out by Sweet 16.
Only 1 team can make a Final Four of the SEC.
And so to put 4 SEC teams in that side of the bracket, and it's our top 3 SEC teams too.
Outside of Tennessee.
It's just very frustrating from that end because I'm just kind of like, well, we would never do that to a Big Ten team.
Right.
Like, we never saw that with Big Ten teams. You never put Penn State, Minnesota, and Wisconsin in the same side of the bracket. Nope. Like, they did not see each other till regional finals or Final Fours. And so to have 4 of them, 2, I understand, but 4 of them is a lot. Yeah. And to be with Nebraska, who Kentucky fans love.
Is there any surprise?
That's never a team we see in the tournament, but I think it's helpful because they've played them not in a tournament situation, which I think is also exciting because I would have loved to play Nebraska before I saw them in the tournament. But, it's exciting. It can be exciting because you've seen teams that you've seen before. You know how to beat them, and even though they lost in Nebraska the first time they played them, this team now and that team that played Nebraska are 2 very different teams.
Very much so.
And we saw spurts of what we're seeing now during that Nebraska game. It's going to be really interesting to see a team, if they get to that point, because we don't get far ahead. You can't do that in this. You got to focus on Wofford. But the potential to have a team that top 3 in the country in opponent hitting percentage by one of the most dynamic offenses. That's going to be a fun match if we get to see it. But first, they got to focus on Thursday. And the thing about the tournament is these 64 teams all deserve to be here. It's not like conference when you're playing people from Kentucky's all the way down to people who are 1-14 in the conference. You are playing teams that either won their conference or showed the tournament committee that they deserve to be here. And so I think at that point, you have to take every game with a grain of salt. You can't overestimate and you can't underestimate any team that you're playing here. You have to continue and play your volleyball regardless of who's across the net, especially with teams like this, where you get the mid-majors, teams that you've never seen before, have different makeups than what we're used to. Like most of the SEC teams, you got your big girl like Florida, you have teams like Arkansas who are very crafty, you know what you're seeing. When you get teams like mid-majors, where you've never seen before, whole different calibration of players, which also brings a whole different type of volleyball. It's like Western. It reminds me of Western. Western compared to Kentucky when they've played them is definitely undersized compared to Kentucky, but Western was so crafty, so smart at hitting off the block, and that's what you have to look for in these situations now of teams are playing completely different volleyball, and they're going to find ways to beat you on little things that you've never seen before.
And we saw Western almost beat you when you were in the tournament. Obviously, that famous game where you guys went down 0-2 to Memorial, those crafty teams can get you if you're not careful. So Kentucky's got to come out and play Wofford. Make sure they are focused solely on that one team. Don't look ahead like you mentioned. When you look kind of at the path that Kentucky might have to get to a Final Four, that Baylor game I think is interesting, possibly in the second round. Baylor's a team that's currently ranked in the top 25. They don't have Yassiana Presley, who you just played with in Athens Unlimited, that dynamic hitter that Yassiana was something to watch. So you don't have to worry about Yassiana this year, but that's obviously still a good team out of the Big 12. They've played the Texases, they've played the Houstons and the Kansases. So it's a team that's familiar with playing top 25 talent. So that could be an interesting game. Obviously, the potential matchup against Arkansas, who you just beat. Arkansas is one of those teams that I think, like we've mentioned, they remind us very much of the teams that you played on, where it was you and Allie, very left pin dominant. But to beat a team 3 times is hard. And I think Arkansas, if Kentucky were to get there, and if Arkansas were to get there, that's a game where Arkansas is going to think back to, hey, we could have won an SEC title, and you all beat us on our home floor in a sweep, and we didn't get one. And if they weren't already having revenge on the mind from the first meeting, they're going to have it for sure if you didn't let them win an SEC title in one of the most historic years of their program's history. So that's a game, obviously, to keep an eye on. And then, obviously, the big one that everyone's kind of talking about, I think, is that Nebraska matchup. I do think it's beneficial that Kentucky played Nebraska in the Devaney Center this year. So, obviously, Nebraska getting that number 1 seed, they are able to host up until the Final Four if they continue to win. So that would potentially be a matchup, I believe. Would that be to go to the Final Four? It would be, yeah. So if you played them, it would be with the Final Four on the line. You've played in the Devaney Center. You know what it's like to play in front of that 15,000 people or whatever it is, because they're crazy over there in Nebraska. They love volleyball. So Brooklyn and Molly, those freshmen, have played in there. Audrey, the sophomore, they've played in there. So you're not going to go into that match and be shell-shocked, I don't think, and that's a good thing. That's why Craig schedules those kind of really difficult non-conference schedules, because he knows that in that tournament, when you have to be a team that is hosting, if you don't get that top 4 seed, you're going somewhere else. And so that's where that non-conference comes into play. You've already played in Nebraska. You've already played in the Devaney Center, and you mentioned it. Kentucky saw something in that Nebraska match. They broke through to some degree, winning that 3rd set. They were up 5 in that 4th set. If you remember, they were on par to win the 4th and force a 5th, and obviously you get into a 5th set, anything happens. So I think they very much feel like that Nebraska game was one that maybe got away, but also one that they very much had a shot and broke through and saw some things. And the good news about the way college volleyball is this year is there's no behemoth. There's no Stanford with Catherine Plummer and Morgan Hintz that there was several years ago, where it's like, well, nobody's beaten that team. Every team is lost, and I think every team is one that you can look at and go, I don't think there are many teams this year that Kentucky looks at and goes, I'm worried about that one. I really don't. Even in the top 4, like, as great and as talented as Nebraska is, Kentucky's offense is so balanced and they're passing the ball so well. Those are the things that Nebraska usually uses against you. And so if they don't have that to use against you, how do you fare? And we saw they fared relatively okay at the beginning of the year when they were still a very struggling team. So if you played them again, I think that would be a heck of a match, and one that's interesting because it could very much go either way. And obviously, this is a team that is hungry, and Ajani Teeler wants another championship. Elise Getzinger wants another one. Reagan Rutherford, they all talked about that, and I'm sure you noticed after they won that SEC title on Saturday, they celebrated, but they were not over the moon joyous. They knew the job wasn't finished, and when you watched them, it was, we're happy and we know this is a big deal to win this title, but we also know that there's a bigger one on the horizon that we're trying to get after. And I do think having some seniors and a graduate senior that have done it before and know what it takes, this is a path I think that's favorable for Kentucky. I don't think that you really look at anyone in this region and think they have no shot. even the one team that maybe you were a little concerned about was Wisconsin, just because there's so much size. Anna Smrek being 6'8" or whatever she is, playing on the right side, and obviously the middles, and they're just a big blocking team, and that's what Kentucky struggled with early. Now, given they haven't struggled with that as much lately, so maybe that wouldn't even scare you, but you avoided Wisconsin, and so as great as Nebraska is, I don't really think there's any team, and when you look at this possible path to a Final Four, that really, really scares you. Is there anything you want to add to that about this path?
I mean, I think I would have had a different perspective if Wisconsin did not beat Nebraska.
Yeah, right.
I think once you have a team that gets beat, that then tells you, oh, if they can beat them, then I can do it. That team did, and I can beat them too. And they swept them. Yeah. So that's what makes it exciting. Of like, maybe if they went into the tournament undefeated, I'd be like, I don't know. No one's beat them yet.
Right.
So if somebody hasn't figured out the formula yet, I don't know if they're going to be able to figure it out in the tournament. But now knowing that going into the last weekend, also out of all the times to lose a match, you do it the last weekend of the regular season, means that this is wide open. Right. And it's tournament time. Upsets happen all the time. I have seen some insane upsets during my time that I was like, how did y'all do this? But you did it. And so it's just kind of like one of those things where like every game you're just going to have to watch, and you never know who's going to catch you off balance.
And we obviously, you want to take it one game at a time. Nebraska is far down the road if you even get there. But Craig Skinner, he has never beaten Nebraska since he has been at Kentucky. Nebraska has knocked his best teams out of the tournament almost every time he's gotten. They didn't play Nebraska the title year, but every other one, some of his best teams, Nebraska, John Cook, his former mentor who he coached under, he's beaten Kentucky every time and knocked them out. He beat you twice. You lost to Nebraska twice when you were here. Some of Craig's best teams, he wants a shot. He wants to beat Nebraska one time. So I'm sure he's looking at that and going, man, if we get there, I really want that one. Obviously, you're going to a Final Four, you want it, but he wants to be able to beat Nebraska and say, hey, we finally, and hey, this is one of John Cook's better teams that he's had in a long time. Obviously, one loss in the year, it's a young Nebraska team that's going to be around for a long time. So Craig's looking at that and going, okay, if we get there, I want that shot. Let's transition to AceNet. We're going to break down a little bit how that tournament works. It's a little bit different than college basketball. It's funny because Kentucky is given the 8 seed, but they have a 2 next to their name, so it's kind of confusing. So if you haven't watched volleyball, or if you're not familiar with the bracket, Leah's going to break some of it down for us quickly, just about how the committee comes up with seeding, how it all works, KPI, RPI, all that stuff that plays a bigger factor in volleyball than it does in basketball. So Leah, why don't you take over for us?
Yeah, so it's a mix of basketball and volleyball, and they kind of started this a couple of years ago. It wasn't a thing when I was here, so it's now you have the kind of like the 1 through, you're numbered in a seed, but each region is numbered, but the top 15 teams are the teams that host. So Kentucky, for their section of the bracket, is the 2 seed. That's the highest seed in that area, so they're the ones that host. So the great thing about volleyball is you host up into the Final Four. So there's a potential, like a team like Nebraska will probably host all the way up to that Final Four match, which is really cool because even though it's NCAA and they take away any type of home team advantage by taking away any paraphernalia, all that type of stuff, it's still home team because, of course, your home team is going to have the most people in the stands because you're in your city. So it becomes extremely beneficial. It's a really cool aspect of volleyball, of getting to see people play at their home stadiums. But yeah, so with the bracket, I mean, other than the seeding, which is kind of strange, and sometimes it's a little confusing to me because even though they're the 2 seed in the league, they are the 8 seed overall. So if you number the teams 1 through 64, Kentucky is 8. That's around where we thought they were going to be. We were thinking 7-8 kind of situation.
Which after their start is unbelievable.
Which is fantastic because, I mean, after their start, nobody even thought they were going to make the tournament, and they would have had to put on an extreme case, which they did. They performed extremely well to show the committee, like, hey, nope, this is still a fantastic team that deserves to be in there. And, again, the automatic qualifier bid that they got by winning the SEC outright automatically put them in the SEC. So when they were watching today, they knew they were going to be in the bracket. It was just where. And so, of course, this year it's in Tampa. It's a very quick tournament. It is not as elongated as basketball is. So this first weekend, the first and second rounds, they are back-to-back. So Kentucky's little semi-region, quad, whatever you want to call it, will play Thursday, Friday. It'll be a mix depending on where your schedule is. So like here, Kentucky's playing Thursday, Friday because basketball plays on Saturday. But there might be other places that are playing Friday, Saturday. But regardless, you are playing 2 games back-to-back no matter what. So you'll win one night and you'll play the next night. And then going into, I guess, next week, maybe 2 weeks away from here, you'll have your Sweet 16 and Elite 8. And that is a, I believe, Friday, Sunday match. So your Sweet 16 will be on Friday and your Elite 8 will be on Sunday, which is super cool because when I played, it was back-to-back. So you were playing Friday, Saturday, regardless, and that destroyed bodies, and I think that changed landscapes of games, but we're not going to get into that because there's nothing like playing a 5-setter on Friday and then having to turn around and play in the middle of the day another game. So really happy that they made that change, and then you'll go into your Final Four weekend, and I believe they play Thursday, Saturday, and that's really, really huge this year because it'll be on ESPN and ABC, which has never happened before, and it's really exciting for that. But yeah, that's basically kind of how the tournament works in volleyball. I mean, it's kind of straightforward. You win the game, you keep going, and that's kind of how that works, and it's going to be really, really exciting to see these games on such big networks this year. And yeah, anything else you want me to cover?
We can talk a little bit about RPI too, because RPI is a big thing in college volleyball, and that's who you beat, but then who do you beat? Who do they beat?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit confusing because for instance, when you play Louisville, right, you want to beat Louisville, but if you're a Kentucky fan, you kind of are cheering for Louisville because you want them to keep winning, because the better they do, the better you look. So, for instance, when Pittsburgh got those 2 wins over Kentucky early and Kentucky went 2-6, everyone was like, wow, those wins aren't as great as they are. Well, they just rattled off a 16-match winning streak. Kentucky goes 6-1 against top 25 teams in the SEC. Those 2 matches that Pitt won over Kentucky in the beginning of the year look really, really good. They look like some of the best wins in the country because you beat Kentucky on its home floor, and then you came home and beat Kentucky. And so RPI is one of those things where it's evolving all year long. It's a very big thing in volleyball. Kentucky, the best teams that Craig has had, have been very high in the RPI. That team that when you all got to host, that you all were number 1 in the RPI. A lot of people didn't think Kentucky was going to get a top 4 seed that year, but they did because that RPI was so high. So RPI is a big factor in college volleyball in determining where your seeding is going to go. KPI is a new thing. That is a confusing thing, but it has to do with if you beat teams in a certain number of sets. So the quicker you beat a team, the better. So a 3-set sweep over Arkansas on the road looks way better than a 5-set win over Arkansas at home. So that win that Kentucky just got, 2 sweeps over 2 top 25 teams, 1 on the road, 1 at home, that looked really, really good on the KPI. And then obviously the committee talks about tonight, what have you done for me lately? Well, I don't think any team in the country qualifies better than Kentucky for that. Obviously, 16 straight matches. So committee is looking at who have you beaten recently? Have you gone on a winning streak recently? Have you been able to string wins together is really what they're looking at there. And so obviously the last thing is one of those strength of schedules thing, which again, when you look at the non-conference, it's why Craig's schedule is so tough, because RPI strength of schedule goes so largely in that NCAA tournament, and you ideally want to host through the Final Four, and the way you do that is by playing that hard non-conference and getting more wins. I think honestly, if Kentucky had picked up maybe 2 more wins in the non-conference, they would have been in consideration for a top 4 seed, which is crazy to think about because they started so slow. But when you look at how good the SEC was, getting 8 teams in the conference, going 6-1 in the top 25 in your SEC by itself, and then obviously you already got the win over Houston, who was ranked and obviously in the tournament. If you would have picked up maybe one of those Pittsburgh wins and maybe won that Purdue match that went to 5, I think Kentucky would have had a very strong case to should they be hosting. There were some people on Twitter wondering, will they host this year regardless where they were now? I never thought that was a possibility. You had too many losses. But this team is certainly playing like one of the top 4 seed, and so it's exciting. Kentucky obviously getting ready to go in this NCAA tournament. We're going to see what this team's made of. It's one that I think reminds us a lot of that title team just because of the balance and because of how good they are at the setter position and libero position, which were both massive parts about that title team, Mastinelli and Gabby Curry. So I think there's a lot of buzz around Lexington about what this team can accomplish, and it starts on Thursday with a game against Wofford, and then if they win that one, obviously Baylor has to win their match too, but if they win that one, the likely opponent would be Baylor, who's ranked in the top 25. That's another thing about volleyball. You're usually playing top 25 teams in the second round, which is difficult. I mean, you're having to beat some of the best teams in the country just to get to the Sweet 16. It's hard. The NCAA tournament volleyball is not an easy thing to do. And it, obviously it being single elimination and playing the talent, the parity that's in the entire country this year. So Cats are going to have their work cut out for them. But I do think that when you look at their potential path to a Final Four, I don't want to say it's favorable and easy because it's definitely not. But a lot of familiar opponents that you've beaten, so you know the game plan, you know how to do it, you're familiar with it. But even some opponents that you maybe didn't beat, but you played in their arena and you know what they're about. and you want your revenge. So we will see what Kentucky does. We're going to do a post-game show after that match on Thursday. Hopefully it's a winning post-game show. Cats take on Wofford. So we'll do one there, breaking down that match, and then hopefully previewing the next match. And then same thing Friday if they do indeed play. If whatever happens in that result, we'll again recap that match. And if they win, we'll recap the next weekend as well. So thank you guys again for joining us. Thank you, Leah, for joining me and breaking down the NCAA tournament for us. Exciting times for Kentucky and Lexington as they get ready to chase a second national title, coming off of a 7th straight SEC title. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We will see you guys this weekend.